for both of them. That is so much the story of filmmaking and any editorial function that you have. It's a matter of cutting out the inessential so the essential can rise above. And the metaphor they use in that scene is lightning. Lightning works because the background is black, right? Usually, or darker. So you want the important stuff to stand out from the rest, the inessential. And it's an important lesson. We have to tell ourselves that over and over again, and maybe it sinks in. But that's why these films work on you. Fern?
There's a very good line from Mark Twain. I think he said that he wrote a long novel. He wrote a very long piece because he didn't have time to write a short one.
Right. That's right. And you probably know that from the briefs you've written, Fern. It's easy just to spill it out. It's called the direct method, where stream of consciousness, which is the way that Woolf wrote and writes in the movie, even though it's beautiful language. And it doesn't mean that it serves his purpose very well. And the role of, it's interesting, Perkins takes on the role of father, and that's a theme that comes up a lot in this movie, that he is the discipline, he is the objective view of the work to help the author see it better, what they hath wrought. Susie, you have a question? You're muted.
That was the big one.
Lower left corner.
Here we go.
Good.
It's a comment and a question. My comment is that it was it was wonderful. I didn't know all those things about Thomas Wolfe, and I thought it was wonderful. My question is, I wonder if it is my TV. Was it especially dark? And if that was the case, was it supposed to be so dark?
Well, it was dark, but did anybody notice the muted colors in this? It was almost black and white all the time.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. But
yeah,
more black than white.
That was intentional. One, it was
Yes.
Judy. Okay,
Yes.
it was intentional. Part of it is the subdued nature of the era to contrast his flamboyance. Yeah, please mute minors. But the color palette changed. They'd let color sneak in depending upon the scene. Like when he goes home for the first time and he opens the parlor door and his wife is rehearsing one of her plays. She's wearing a gold tiara with a leaf on it, and the gold just jumps out at you. And there's more color in that room than there normally is elsewhere in the movie. And around the dinner table, I noticed a slight increase in the color palette. The process is called desaturation, where you take the intensity out of the whole color spectrum and you can approach black and white.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and you know, we shoot in full digital color, but you can make it look like black and white and different kinds of black and white. I suspect this was shot on film, but they went through a digital process to control the color. You know, again, like Fern pointed out, it allows the emotions and the drama to stand out more. You probably noticed this in other black and white films you've seen. And
yes.
Mitch, want to report on Seven Samurai, which I know you saw? All black and white. Did it need color? Okay.
I didn't see it.
Yeah, well, I think Mitch is the only one. It's okay. I'm not sensitive.
But for me, just to finish my comment, the scenes in the office, when the two of them were in the publisher's office,
were
especially dark, really dark.
Well, that's kind of a hallowed ground. It's almost like his temple that Perkins's temple that Wolfe has come to worship in. You know, and as do many other writers of the time, because he was the most celebrated editor at Scribner's and in New York. So it's again, there was a single light source, and that was the big window in his office. And there's a whole scene where it starts out with Wolfe in the window with his back to Perkins. So it's kind of like it's symbolic in a way. You know, Perkins is trying to shed light on the material, but Wolfe is trying to show it in full light. You know, it's probably an intellectualism, but it fits so much, that lighting choice that they made there for the office. But you'll notice you never were you felt cheated by not seeing an emotional expression well enough. It was so well controlled. It was all intentional. So it was not your TV, you know, although you might play with the brightness level a little bit because but it just was done by consummate professionals. And uh, I looked up the director, and you know, he doesn't direct movies. This, I think, is the only film he directed. He's a stage director in London and an opera director. So he's quite sensitive to performance and script, and got a great team of people behind him. But I think there's just a lot of cinematic, can I use the Yiddish word seichel? You know, sense. Just the good judgment of what does the material need to be felt. And it surprised me, because usually this film looked like the sign of a mature filmmaker who had 10, 15 films under his belt. Not so. Now, he did do a lot of television and a lot of theater. So, but the television in terms of lighting is very different, you know. They try and make things bright usually, although I didn't really study his credits. Carol, you have a question?
I do. Thank you for suggesting this little jewel, this treasure of a film. It was so artfully made. I wanted to comment on the Perkins paternal, the father figure. And one of the symbols, since you're mentioning symbols, was his hat.
Yep.
He wore indoors at the dinner table all the time, except unless I'm mistaken, at the very end when he drops that paternal role. It's not, he's a father at the family, he's a father with his writers, but he takes it off and just goes man to man, heart to heart with the
Okay.
goodbye, the love letter. The hat
Okay.
comes off for the first time.
Okay. What does all that mean to you? Before you saw the ending, that he wears his hat all the time?
He was governing himself in a role all the time. He was very to the letter, loyal, instructive, many wonderful qualities, but I think he kept a lid on his emotions.
And that was part of Wolf's beef with him, wasn't it? You don't really live life. But here's a question. He walks into the house for the first time, and his two daughters come up and throw their arms around him. He says, "Hello, ducks," and then he sends them away. You know, I thought, oh my God, is this guy going to be a tyrant with his kids? You know, and it turns out he has a great relationship with his family. They adore him. He adores them. They tolerate. That's just dad. You know, dad is internal and circumspect and thoughtful, and he's often lost in other thoughts than us. Yet they accept him. So that was a comfort throughout the whole film. The relationship to his family, which was clearly expressed. And of course, the girls are very precocious, and they didn't get that way because of him. They got that way because of their mother, who had been an actor, but gave it up to raise a family of 4 girls. So, and it's funny, the mother accepted that role willingly, but she's a wise owl, isn't she? She lets him know what he's doing. That scene where they want to go off on vacation, and she says, "Now wave to the girls," you know. At the end, she knows what they need to see after they overhearing the argument. So I thought that, you know, he would become a tyrant with his family, and he did not. Yeah, on the contrary, he exuded warmth with them and tolerance. You know, he says 10 o'clock to his oldest daughter, and she comes back at 11. And as she walks past his study, he only says 10. You know, it's like they're used to that shorthand, because it's like he lives in shorthand. You know, the fewer words, the better. And if you're using words, they better have impact and be meaningful. And this is a watchword of films that are not boring, that every moment is meant to compel you to the next moment, not wait for it. You're dragged along with what's called narrative momentum. And that's not just the plot and the action that propels the plot. It's the character's engagement with the story and the threats to them and the successes and the failures, where they are in their own lives with the story. And that's what drags you through. the film. It's like, I want to see what's going to happen to Max because I like him, or I want to see what's going to happen to Tom Wolfe. Who else wants to talk? Marina.
I was also drawn to the hat from the very beginning, and it's customary to take the hat off when you eat or when you come into the house. But I don't know if it's true what I Googled, that Perkins was hard of hearing, and he was wearing a hat to turn his ears so as to hear better.
Maybe.
It's not spelled out in the movie.
No.
We don't hear anything about it. But I was also mesmerized by it, and I read.
I like Carol's interpretation better because
I absolutely
it cuts,
agree.
cuts the character because it works. It's like whatever interpretation we bring to a movie, if it seems to work across the board, then it probably does. And it's like if the filmmaker didn't intend that, then it's his fault or her fault. But Carol, you brought up the most important thing. He takes it off. It's not a mistake. He takes it off when he reads the letter, because now he's worshiping in his own temple to the letter and to Thomas Wolfe. It's a moment of extreme vulnerability. And that was the key to Thomas Wolfe connecting with him. So again, he's not protected from the elements, from the wind, from the sun. It's just his raw scalp and head. So that is the symbolism of the hat, I think. It's a symbol of how he isolates himself from others and how this guy really got under his skin in a meaningful way. David Bornstein, you have a question? And then our lead.
No, I'm sorry, just a comment. When you were talking about how dark the film was in the lighting, when I noticed that too, of course, and I was thinking two things. One, it's taking place in New York in 1929. So there's very dark things afoot.
Yeah.
And then also that whenever they're in the office, following up on your comment about it's his temple, his worship place, it was very serious. Whenever he was in his office, he was working on serious business. And so to me, making it a darker scene, for me at least, meant that it was something that was more important or more significant.
Yeah, I think your observation is absolutely right about the depression and the feet, the wet feet, and the coffee and donut line. This is an indication of how the other world existed. And Wolfe even says at one point, these people will never read me, but my God, we can't, this is going on and we're indulging in our intellectualizations of our art, so it's like he wasn't, Wolfe wasn't blind to what he was doing and the state of the world. He just was so egocentric, he had to pursue it his way, and it became very destructive to other people, which is one of those themes that keeps getting repeated. I could see the theme of you hurt the people you love the most, but I didn't realize how prevalent it was throughout and how prevalent this theme of the river. One of his books is called Of Time in the River. And he talks about how I went away to college and my father kept receding in the past as I left on the train, but everything has led me back to him, and of course, Perkins is the father figure. And even Laura Linney says he's always wanted a son, but we couldn't have any more kids. So it's an irresistible relationship for him to mentor somebody who was not manly like Hemingway or intense in the Fitzgerald had his own, with Zelda being so sick. By the way, that was the woman from The Crown and so many. She's a great character actor. Did anybody remember her name? It'll come back to me. British actor. All she had to do was just look panicked, and that was a great silent performance. So it's the filmmakers were in total control of this, and that lighting, it did change a little bit from scene to scene. Maybe it wasn't as effective as they hoped, but when they walked out into the daylight, like when they're looking out from the rooftop of the cityscape. Very important scene because he cites it in his letter. And it's a moment of repose for both of them. They're gazing out into the power of the world, the tumult of life, and witnessing it, in a symbolic way. But that was not hard to see. And as they emerged from the inside of his first apartment to the rooftop, there's, when the faces need to be seen, they were fully seen. So, yeah, Carol?
It felt to me, it felt to me like a play. It felt to me as though the intimacy of the interrelationships and the characters and also the action was seen. Very little need to be outside of a room, only in that one editing rapid. It could be just his office or just with Nicole Kidman or just with Laura Linney. There was almost no need for real action, and each scene was complete. It was I felt very much like I was watching a play on stage.
The action is internal. It's our sense of where they are with their relationship. And they're pushing us, the audience, along by the developments in each scene. So you're right, there's no physical action. And the scene I cited where they're editing that section, they're walking and talking, because that's invented. Of course they didn't walk, on the street and then stop and make the changes on the wall of Grand Central Station. But it's a way of making physical, how they could be blind to the rest of the world and so into their work that they could edit anywhere. Nobody would understand them if they overheard the conversation. But we did.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, and then there's a big montage that follows of them working together. But so you could say that was active, but again, it's nothing really happens except that they work together. The book is better. It's a hit. He's arrogant. Aline is angry with him. Aline threatens to, leave him, or she takes pills, and he swears he loves her. And, that's not much action. It is a bit Shakespearean, or it's a melodramatic, but that's Aline. And she's the canary in the coal mine. She warns Perkins, this is what he did to his family. This is what he did to me, and he's going to do it to you too. He consumes us. So we see the effects of being bereft by the one you love and need, the one whose expression of the life force, if I can use that term, is so admirable and magnetic, you have to be near it. And remember, Perkins's wife says to her, go back to your husband. That's the life, in your family. That's what you need to do. And she says, you don't understand. I married my husband by accident. I shouldn't have done it. I was too young. He lost interest, but Tom made me feel alive. And that was irresistible. And of course, when something that's irresistible and makes you abandon your own family deserts you for the book editor, it's not even a romantic relationship, but it's an emotionally dependent one. She flipped out, and it's understandable. So, that's a more conventional part of the movie, but I thought Nicole Kidman was wonderful. Every nuance of her performance was just great. Betty, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I really loved this movie, and I'm so glad you recommend. In fact, I wasn't even sure if I was going to join the discussion because we're leaving town tomorrow, but I love the movie so much. I wanted to hear what everybody had to say. One thing that surprised me was after I saw the movie, the reviews were very poor, which, I was surprised. And not only were they poor, but they were poor for opposing reasons. One said it was very boring and dull and not much action. And then another one said it was overly dramatic. Well, how can it be both? So,
well, there's people have different ideas of drama, and boring, and it takes all horse races. But again, if the movie didn't make you follow the internal struggle that these two guys had and the coming together that they had, then it lost you, because along the way, people get involved and then hurt and abandoned and hurt some more. So that's really the theme of the movie. Yet this river theme, coming back to his father, and coming back to Perkins, sending him a telegram, telling me that when he goes to Europe and then coming back, it's like he's coming home because he says to Perkins that you're the only friend I've ever had. And I could see that. I don't know if it's true or not. The thing with Wolf, as portrayed in the movie, is you don't know how much is just blowhard Wolf and how much is sincere Wolf. But there's a scene after that dinner with the family early in the film. He said, I know I can be perceived like a freak, but I'm not. I feel things just like everybody else.
Mm.
But in more words. Jeff Allison, Jeffrey, hi.
So I think another struggle that's in the film is the issue of, like, at the end of all the work, is it the editor's work or is it the writer's work? And what's to say which is the better, the original or the edited? I think, for example, Night was originally 800 pages long. Yeah. And it got reduced to 100 pages, and Wiesel basically argued that all 800 pages are there. They're just in the spaces between the words.
Well, that sounds like a political thing.
Well, whatever. But I think it raises a question of whose real work is it? Is it the editor or is it the author? So that was a struggle
Well, having been in that situation, his role really resonated with me because the editor is trying to make it better by letting the essentials stand out more so the audience gets it and goes deeper into the material. Does that serve the author or not? Well, in that scene in Grand Central Station where they're editing on the fly, Jude Law says, "Oh, but the words mean so much to me. You can't cut the words." And he said, "But what about the people who are reading it? You're writing this for you or not?" And eventually, as happens in most of the movie, he sees that he likes where Perkins is steering him. And Jeff, now look, you're a teacher and you grade students' papers, right? So yes. It's the same thing. Are you making them better or different?
Well, I'm going through it. I wrote a chapter. It's with an editor at Columbia University. He keeps editing stuff that I think should be there. And I have to take the editor's viewpoint, but I'm not happy about what's being cut out.
Well, but you have lengthy discussions about the importance of what's being cut out, yes?
No, it's like he writes stuff and that's it.
I think you have to find a new publisher then, because you're not going to be happy. Really, at some point.
No, it's I understand exactly where he's coming from and what he's saying, and it changes things, and I am not sure that I like the changes, but I can understand why the changes are there.
Okay. And do you accept the changes as being productive?
Yeah. No, I think he's ultimately right. But I mean, I think I'm not talking about me. I'm thinking more in terms of what Wolf was saying at the end of this, and he was talking about, or the editor was talking about, was I really right to cut all of this stuff out? And I think that any author probably who's dealing with something like that, or an artist, any kind of artist, has to struggle with this issue.
Right. It's a real issue in the arts and in just everyday communication. Think of a newspaper editor who's copy editing a journalistic article from a novice reporter. And there's a bent of the paper, a tradition of point of view and a sense of what is good journalism. In other words, our mission is to keep the people informed. Is this really keeping them informed, or are you wasting their time? Let's move on. We have a lot of hands up there. Arlene Schwimmer wanted to speak.
Yes, yeah. First of all, I wanted to thank you so much for this film. I loved it. It was fascinating. It was quite deep and very emotional.
Yeah, for grown-ups.
Yeah, to me at least. And I thought the acting was terrific. I couldn't believe how good Jude Law was. And of course, Colin Firth.
Yeah.
I really loved the acting.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been thinking about why the hat became so important. I still don't know the answer, but I felt like it was Perkins' way of keeping himself under control.
Yeah.
He seemed such a poet himself and so devoted to the words and the importance of what those words meant to the whole project. And then there was a scene, and this has totally nothing to do with the other thing. There was the only scene when he smiled.
Mm-hmm.
He was so dour up until Thomas Wolfe took him to this jazz club.
Yeah, right.
And for the first time, you saw Perkins smile.
Mm-hmm.
And he was loving it and loving Wolfe, but he also had his own morals held in check while Wolfe was busy womanizing the working girls. There was no way that Perkins was going to do that.
No, they were from different schools, you know.
Absolutely. But each of them really had a great relationship and a magnetism between them that it was irrefutably a joint product.
Yeah, it's like you can't, you know, you loved each performance and you love them together as well.
Correct.
You know, you like the sparks that flew. The Reiners, did you have a comment? And then Brad.
Yes.
Karen.
Yes. I have two points. One is more troubling than the other, but wondering about the hat. Do we know whether that was true to form or whether that was our director's prop for this particular?
I'll bet it was true. I bet it's a real.
It's a real character.
Perkins. Yeah,
okay.
I don't know for sure, but you just don't invent something like that. Out of the blue.
My second question, and I'd like to hear thoughts about it. It's surprising to me the dichotomy here of Wolfe being a loner, not having friends except Perkins is finally estranged from family, etc. And how can someone who is such a loner without other acquaintances write so eloquently about the human feelings and emotion in relation to others? That is surprising.
Well, he acknowledges that, what you're feeling there. You know, he says, I know people think I'm a freak, but I feel things like anyone else.
Yeah, but so deeply and beautifully described.
Well, that's his talent. He's a wordsmith. He's in love with the sound of his own voice and the words. And frankly, I love the stuff they cut out. You know, it's like, it's florid, but as read by Wolfe or by Perkins, you know, it all made sense. You know, the run-on sentences held together. You followed it, and they made it accessible. So,
you know, somewhere in the dialogue, James Joyce is mentioned. I forgot in what regard, but reading Joyce is similar to the kind of prose that was being
Yeah.
recited in this movie.
Yeah, after the first book came out, the reviews.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, who hasn't spoken yet? Brad and Karen.
Yeah,
Bill.
I just wanted to add that it's important to focus on what the editor was trying to uh, eliminate from the book. And what his focus on was on plot and things that were extraneous to plot and to the plot development. That's what he wanted to edit out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's telling us a lot about literature of that period, where if you think about Hemingway, one of his other writers, Hemingway, it's all plot driven. Whereas at the same time, there were radical changes going on with the novel. So at the same time, Marcel Proust was writing, for example, and Proust is also mentioned in the film.
Mm-hmm.
And you go through hundreds of pages where absolutely nothing happens in terms of advancing the plot. And this has been in 20th century literature, the major movement in literature has been away from plot-based literature towards something else, whether it be character-based or language-based. So I think that what this film is showing is a dramatic tension that existed during that period and had really continued throughout the 20th century in terms of the development of the novel.
Well, those are great observations. I want to chime in on the first thing you said is that Perkins was always taking out plot points. He was advancing the plot. And I'd like to slice that onion a little thinner and say it wasn't the plot, it was the clarity of feelings of the character. You see, he wanted a more crystalline and succinct description of what the character was feeling, whereas left to his own, Woolf embellished it, like her eyes, and her skin was like the pink of a conch shell or a mollusk. And Perkins says, "Let's leave the zoology out of this. What did you feel?" And it's like, again, it's cleaning up the language to focus on what's really important. Is that what did you feel? And the end of the scene is nobody else in the room heard him fall in love. So less is more, and maybe that's part of the 20th century adaptation that the modernists brought pre-World War II and accelerated in the 50s. That less is more, especially in design, but there was less is more in literature too. Granted, it went over the top and became irrelevant eventually with John Cage and music that was random, or Jackson Pollock, whose art was kind of random, and then Andy Warhol, whose art was just a reflection of advertising and what was popular in the culture. So all that is buried in this film. I totally agree, but that's not Perkins. He wanted to sell books. He wanted this book that he believed in to reach more people than it would have without his participation. So, and again, that's why he has doubts about himself at the end, saying, was anything, even Da Vinci said at the end of his life, was anything ever done? Did I make it better or just different? And it's moot, I think. This is the way of the world. Very few authors self-publish, or plenty do now on the internet, but it doesn't get read. So it requires a sense of, look, every star, every successful filmmaker. Like if you've seen Kinds of Kindness, Lanthimos's film after Poor Things. Poor Things I thought was brilliant. Kinds of Kindness was a total sham. And it was like some self-confident filmmaker just indulged himself. And believe me, it was not only boring, it was gross. And I don't want to flatter it by saying it was non-linear. It was a mess. And it was just, let's see what I can do. Then now that I'm a hit and people will fund me, I can do whatever I want. It lacked discipline and purpose, at least as communicated to the viewer. So every star needs a Jiminy Cricket on their shoulder, a moral voice, an aesthetic voice saying, no, that's not a good idea. I know that from my own work with Jerry Lewis, so I don't really call an artist, but again, a star who begins to believe in their fame so much that they make mistakes because they think they're indomitable and flawless. And that's ego gone astray, and it applies to our politicians today too. They're so confident in what they have without seeing the bigger picture of the consequences of what they're proposing. Look at that 2025 document. It makes you sick. But I won't politicize. I never do that. Let's hear from Steve Zimmerman. Steve Zimmerman, and then Carol, and then David again.
Yeah, I mean, just sort of following up on what you were saying, I would think the primary function of the editor is to sort of connect the writer with an audience.
You bet.
Okay. I mean, in fact, I think the editor is almost putting himself in the mindset of an audience, right? So what effect are your words having on me? Am I getting it? Is it over the top? Is it, resonating? So, and I think a writer can sometimes get lost in that sense. They kind of lose track of the fact there's an audience that you're trying to communicate with.
You mean Norman Mailer?
So busy, huh?
Norman Mailer, another.
Yeah, right. They're so busy, going in their own head about what they're experiencing. They forget they're trying to communicate with an audience. So, it's interesting that he would get so lost in his own internal feelings and notions about what he was experiencing. But that was reflected in his life as well, right? He was totally a self-absorbed person, right. And wasn't connecting up with other people, other friends. Nicole Kidman, Eileen. It was all about him. And in fact, I mean, he was essentially portrayed in the movie, and I don't really know anything about Thomas Wolfe. This was kind of educational for me, but it's like he had OCD. Okay. I mean, he was just so obsessed, frankly, with what he was doing to the exclusion of all kinds of balance, right? It was like a life out of balance.
Well, that's why very late in the film, he goes to Hollywood and he visits Fitzgerald. And Fitzgerald really lets him have it between the eyes. You don't know the damage you do to other people. And what a shame that you let this kind, sensitive man down and abandon him. And shortly after that, he dies because I think it all seeped in. He dies, yes, because he was sick, but he dies also because the weight of what he had done was too much to bear. Joel Jasmine, you've been waiting to say something.
It's actually, Helene would like to say something.
I thought the scene at the jazz club was Wolf trying to justify his words, and to show how a main theme can be worked on, way that one song was done with the music, and this was him trying to illustrate what his too many words were about.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. He says at the beginning of that scene, you don't understand me unless you understand the music that I came from. And that's why I'm taking you here. And then the beautiful trick is he takes that song, Sweet Afton, and the jazz musicians, just totally change it around. And it's like this remarkable transformation that often happens in literature when a good editor works on it. So he's demonstrating, this is what you're telling me to do. Well, this is what I'm telling you, how to reflect upon my passion. you know, and it was very telling. It was a great move, a great scene. And
Was.
yeah, of course, but you see the character development goes even deeper. Wolf goes with the two working girls, as he calls them. And Wolf goes home and works in his study. You know, like, oh, that is the difference. You know, he doesn't need that. Um, and there's another moment when they come back from vacation. He embraces his wife passionately. And it's like this relationship with Wolf has an effect upon Perkins. And you see that it's less dramatic, but mostly it's the abandonment. It's one thing the film did not do that well is to show how Wolf abandoned Perkins. You know, he tells Fitzgerald, "Oh, he ruined my work, and he was evil and awful." You know, that one scene doesn't do it. I want to see some dramatic evidence of the hurt. So it could have sharpened that in the film. It was fine the way it is. We still felt for Perkins, you know, at the loss and at the death. David, did you have something to say? And then Carol.
I had to
Yes.
break in. I had to break in right now, though.
Yeah.
Maybe the editor felt that it would have made it too long. They left that part out.
Well, the reason why I pointed out that scene, walking and talking, going through Grand Central Station, this is exactly what film editors do. This line is inessential. We don't need it. If we throw it out, the rest of the sentence will be more meaningful. You know, and forget about the description of the color blue of her eyes. What did he feel? A blue like no other. He fell so quickly, nobody else heard the sound. End of scene. That's what you're left with, was 3 sentences about falling in love that had more impact on the viewer. Now, I'll tell you one thing, that directors and writers and editors realize that sometimes less is more. And that if you just give the outline of the emotions or the feelings, the audience will fill in the blanks appropriately. If the bullet points you're making do connect, and you leave out what's in between. The mind hates a void, hates being uncertain and not knowing, and it will invent its own story. And this is what filmmakers do: is you have to control the imagination of the audience from going into left field, you know, from seeing the wrong things in it. And it's the obligation of the filmmaker to maintain that, I don't want to say, yes, control, you know, keep the attention going in the right direction. David?
Yeah, two quick things. One is, after I saw the film, I was thinking about the title, and I said genius, and it made me think, who was the director or the maker of the film referring to? Is he referring to Thomas Wolfe, or is he referring to Perkins, who actually was a genius in his own right?
Right.
He edited so many great books. And then the other thing was, this was pointed out in a review that I read. It said that although everybody of any consequence in the film is from America, you know, you've got all these American authors and stuff, every single performer was either British or Australian.
Well, they did shoot a lot of it in London, cheaper that way. And the directors and the writers are British. The book was written, though, it's based on a book by A. Scott Berg, who's an American film, television, and drama historian. Carol.
Thank you so much. I'm jumping out of my seat. I love this so much, this movie and all the points you're making. 2 things. One, I thought I heard at the end of the movie when Fitzgerald is admonishing Wolfe, he's a genius in friendship. Did anyone hear that too? And saying, how could you? He takes you by his side, and you're betraying him. He is a genius in friendship.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you for bringing that up.
The scene that I wanted to go back to just succinctly is the jazz music scene. I do not remember musical themes through this movie, but music became the glue, a character, bringing them together. And you mentioned, Jim, shoes, the shoes in the bread lines, the shoes in the wet before he was hired. And you figure that's his one pair of shoes if he needs a job that badly. But but Wolf and Perkins underneath the table, once the music got to him, were tapping in sync. And so I remember Nicole Kidman says he makes you do things you don't want to do. And when Max sits down and he orders, you know, a martini very dry, and he says, no, he'll have bourbon. And he accepts the bourbon. The seduction started. It started in the music, and he didn't like music. And all of a sudden, they're tapping. You see the shoes under the table. It's so artfully done.
Yeah, it really is. That's why it worked on all of us. I think it's ahead of us, and yet it indulges where we are at any given moment and takes us further. Let's see. Any hands up? Oh yeah, Barbara.
How do you explain the reviews that were so negative? What is your understanding of that?
Well, not only were the reviews negative, the box office was terrible. 2016, it made only $7 million. And who knows how much it cost? It probably cost much more than that. And it's an intellectual movie because it's bookish. Excuse me. It's like, do you look bookish? You know, it's a stereotype. You're talking about writers and authors and text. So of course it's beyond me, and therefore I don't really like it. You know, most film critics are not, they don't know much else, you know, and they bring to it what they read in the newspapers, and that's about it. They don't bring a sense of culture and history and drama and writing to it. And you know, the best do, of course. We know one of the best film critics was the guy who wrote A Death in the Family. What was his name? James Agee. He was a great film critic because he understood drama and he understood filmmaking, not in a technical way, but in a dramatic way. And it takes a profound understanding of people to make a good movie, not just the characters, but of how the audience is going to react to them. And whoever said it, the editor's job is very much making sure the audience is connected with. That's job one. Barbara, did you have another question? Oh, okay. So, I mean, I like this movie for other reasons. I just thought the two performances were mesmerizing, and the words were also. But the words come out of, by the way, if you read the credits, you'll notice that the first book, Look Homeward Angel, there are two citations for copyright. One is the original draft and one is the finished draft. And the copyright holders are different. So they needed permission to quote from both to make the movie. I found that very interesting because that reading from those sections that were excised, you know, were really an important part of the film because you saw what Perkins was doing to the man's thought process. And was he changing it? No. Well, you know, was he adjusting it? Yes. You know, it's a gray area. You know, I think that if you accept that it's the purpose of publishing is to reach as many people or as possible, or reach as a more defined audience as deeply as you can, that's okay as long as you understand, you know, what will come from that. You know, it's a strategic decision you as a creative person have to make. You know, is it my audience me? Is it the paying audience? Is it the critics? You know, do I want to just be part of history and someday people will discover this really was the new King Lear? By the way, where is Mitch Stein? Somewhere. Kurosawa, who directed The Seven Samurai, he did a film called Ran, R-A-N, and it's the King Lear story in historical Japanese, which is next on my list. So we're saying, yeah. Did you say something, Mitch?
A couple of things. One, I saw the editors in the film decided to keep in the line that you are my Jewess.
Yes, yes.
I was wondering why they kept that because it never was carried any further than that, well, except for the fact they called her Mrs. Bernstein.
Bernstein, yeah, no.
The other thing
was that was important in the reality of the relationship. Certainly, the literary circle was extremely Jewish at the time, and that's how he thought because he was a Southerner. He's from South Carolina.
I also didn't agree with your feelings about the Perkins and his family, I think there was a great line that the wife said that, these are your children and they're going to have a life that you're going to miss.
Right.
It, reminded us of our working fathers who sacrificed their time with us to put food on the table. And this was a guy who was devoted to his job and spent his 12 to 15 hours a waking day in this vocation that he loved dearly. And on occasion, he would enter the children's life in a very tangential way. I didn't find him to be a very effective mother, and I thought the mother was the mother and the father.
Okay. I just felt that all the scenes with the kids were charming. Of course, their emotions were directed at the newcomer, at Tom Wolfe. But I just felt that there was a jocular relationship there that surprised me after that cold opening when he first comes in the door. Any other comments? Fern.
Yeah, I was struck with something similar to what Mitchell felt. I felt that, it kind of, in a way, glorifies the person who devotes himself to his art or his editing or whatever, and the family is supposed to just say, you're the great man and we will just be your muse and step back. And I'm quite put off by it.
Well, it's true that his wife did sidestep her own career as an actor.
All the women sidestepped everything for these genius men who were totally egocentric and enamored of their own genius. And there were plenty of genius women through history who didn't have the luxury of just saying, you just take care of everything while I pursue my genius.
Right. Dorothy Parker was an
important
intellectual in the New York literary scene for decades.
Yeah,
but that's not the story they're telling. I mean, films can't be all things to all people.
I thought they were telling it in some ways, because to me, when I watched it, I was not charmed by them. I was, and I watched the same film. That's not a negative for the film. I watched it and said, how uncharming are geniuses as portrayed by this, and as I tend to see, and I thought it successfully did that.
It did. I mean, they're both selfish men and career driven and obsessive about their work. That's a fact.
You got Rabo up there.
Jerry Rabo?
Yeah.
Jerome?
The major theme that I took away was the ending scene when Maxwell Perkins is speaking to him and saying, there was a time when the cavemen were afraid and they crawled into the cave. And they were not afraid once someone began telling a story. So to me, that's what this whole movie is about. It's about a story. It's about people telling their stories. It's about people not wanting to face what the cavemen were facing, which was death.
I think that's true. It's just a function of art. That was a part of the rooftop scene, where there's he's just returned from Europe, and at the end, Wolfe puts his head on Perkins's shoulder. That's a very son-father thing, and they let it lie as they look out at the world. But yeah, that's a great analogy.
No, it's the scene when Wolfe is dying, and Maxwell tells him the story.
No, he's dying in the hospital alone.
Yeah, Maxwell didn't go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Somebody was waving their hand at me, or was it a fist?
Well,
okay, Brad.
I thought the addition of Hemingway and
Fitzgerald.
F. Scott Fitzgerald to the movie was very effective. Hemingway, who was the prototype of the auteur engagé, the engaged in politics, in the world type writer. And then you've got Fitzgerald with writer's block. And I read Look Homeward Angel and You Can't Go Home Again when I was a kid, when I was a teenager. And I was thinking to myself, who reads these books today? If anybody reads any of these three authors, it's probably The Great Gatsby.
Yeah.
They read. That's what's endured. Maybe more than the other two.
I think so.
Interestingly enough.
Yeah. You'll notice I don't think anybody's ever tried to make a film about Look Homeward Angel or the River book. Whereas people have tried a couple times to make Gatsby and they failed miserably, but that's another story. Betty.
Actually, I'm glad you brought up that part about Hemingway and Gatsby and Fitzgerald and Gatsby, and because I thought that was very interesting. One thing that I thought was so interesting because The Great Gatsby has endured. It's actually on Broadway now. Where we live in New Jersey, a lot of plays go to a theater in New Jersey before they go to Broadway, and this was one of them. And it was terrific. And now it's on Broadway. And one of the things that really surprised me in the movie was hearing how little money, he got from that story.
Yeah, in its time, it wasn't as celebrated as it was in later decades. And I understand that. It's very critical of American culture. I've read it a couple times, and I've seen both the Leonardo DiCaprio movie and the other one, and they get it all wrong. It's really about American aspirations that are wrong. We had the wrong dreams in the 30s and 40s. We were chasing a corrupt dream that was doomed. And Gatsby started out as this poor kid and invented a history for himself. And he was basically a rum runner. And he came to no good. His end was terrible. And it wasn't just because Leonardo DiCaprio played him, it's because the filmmakers didn't understand the book. That's just my opinion. Okay.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Another thing I wanted to say about that, I thought it was, Thomas Wolfe was so insensitive to the pain that F. Scott Fitzgerald was going through between his wife, and the mental illness and the writer's block. And he was so insensitive to it. And yet he'd gone through something, not where he had writer's block, but where nobody wanted to publish him until he met with Maxwell Perkins. And even when the second book came out, he was so worried about the reviews, he had to go to another country. So certainly he was highly sensitive to what he was going through, but so totally insensitive to what F. Scott Fitzgerald was suffering.
Yeah, well, it's the egotism of the artist. He just didn't see what was in front of him, and he gets nailed for it. That's we didn't talk about the scene, the horrible dinner scene where he upsets Zelda so much, and Perkins throws him out of his house, and they have this argument, and on the street, and Wolfe says, "You've never lived. You don't know what really it's like." And Perkins comes back and says, "There are different ways to live, such as earning a living, taking care of your family, watching them grow, blah blah blah," and he lets him have it, and it affects him. And I think he runs away. He goes to Europe after that. He goes to Aileen and says, "Hey, let's get a car and hit the road together like we once were." And she says, "I've been through too much and I understand too much. I could never feel anything for you again." And he doesn't quite hear that, so he goes off to Europe alone with disastrous results. Okay, so I'm glad you all like this film. I think why films like this don't get discovered, I have no idea. I can't explain it other than it's about authors and publishers, and it just sounds too bookish. Um, and the audience didn't get it. It was released in 2016, which is not that long ago. And Nicole Kidman's in it, you know, not a very sexy role, but a great performance. And it's like it's too grown up. You know, what are these social media influencers going to say about this film? They barely know who Fitzgerald was or Perkins, you know, or the Great Depression. It's like it's not their stock and trade. I heard an NPR review of the television review of some spin-off of Star Wars, and well, the fandom's all excited about this. The fandom, right? Like the kingdom, those people who follow the Star Wars television series. It's a joke. I mean, it's like, what are they doing with their time? They should be watching Genius, you know, and reading books and going to plays, but that's not ours to control. Okay, so going forward into the future, I wish I could tell you all that I have lined up for you. I'll give you a taste of it.
Can I just mention one thing?
Oops.
Can I just mention one thing about the two main actors?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. I could see, I sense that they weren't, I mean, Jude Law and Colin Firth weren't really that different in age. I mean, just in real life. And it turned out, I looked it up, they're only 12 years apart. So in order to make Colin Firth look like he could be of age to be his father, I saw they put a larger collar and made him look more thinner, and the hat was at an unflattering point where it showed more forehead. You didn't know that he had a full head of hair. And the choice of putting him in all gray, where Thomas Wolfe was in all browns, and there were different devices, but it was a little bit of a stretch age-wise because Jude Law was so close in age to him, but they did a very good job.
They did. I mean, you believe the age difference and the fathership that was involved, you know. It was stated a couple of times by other people, but even if they hadn't said it, you would have felt it, that Perkins took him under his wing. Okay, so we're going to see our next film is next month on August 15th, a Thursday. I have a lot of time to pick things out. And there's a Wolfgang Petzold, a German filmmaker who did Other People's Lives, about the West German Stasi agent who eavesdrops on a progressive actor, theatrical actors and writers' home. Great film we saw. Robert De Niro is in it, and it's called Ezra. It's not out until later this month. I have a feeling it's going to go straight to streaming. It's a Jewish themed film. He's taking care of an autistic nephew, I believe, in it, and they're Jewish. Not that that matters to us anymore. And there's a wonderful film that was nominated, or some country's submission, called Io Capitano. I think it was either Tunisia or Italy's submission, about a young 16-year-old who becomes the captain of a boat trying to leave Tunisia and cross to Italy. And this role of captain is thrust upon this kid. It's on Apple Plus, though. Do people know how to get onto Apple Plus? If you're on Spectrum, you probably get it already. Okay, then maybe we'll avoid that. But coming up, definitely before the election, sorry to bring in the real world, I want to program Nashville, which is the Robert Altman film, very political, from 1971. And then Mike Nichols' last movie called Not the Color of Money. I have to look this up. It's with a great cast. Does anybody remember that film? Let me look it up. I'm blanking on it. It's a wonderful political film about an election season and somebody trying to get elected. And let me look it up quickly for you on IMDb. and we'll see it. And okay. And we'll go Mike Nichols. Mike Nichols.
Primary colors.
Primary colors, you got it. I watched this again. It is so relevant. They say things that could have been in yesterday's newspapers. And it's a well-made film. It's really smart. He did the film after it that he did was called Henry Wilson's War with Julia Roberts, and it's
Charlie
about
Wilson.
yeah, and it's not as good. It's like a studio movie, but this one is really terrific, and we'll see that. And anything else you guys can come up with. And there's stuff. So now September is going to be a tough month looking ahead because I think the holidays come Rosh Hashanah is September 2. So we have to steer clear of that holiness.
I think it's October.
October.
October 2nd.
Sorry, October 2nd. It's on, I'm looking at the September page. So we're pretty clear up until the 25th of September. I'll try and get back on 2 films a month. And
Jim,
yeah.
any chance they will stream Seven Samurai since they redigitized it?
I don't know. That's a very good question. I just don't know.
Jim, will we ever meet in person or is it always going to be online?
We haven't decided. I'm going tomorrow morning to look at the new chapel and what's going on there. And we'll see. I just don't know. It's lovely. Those of you who have not been in the chapel, I think you'll really love it. They did something really strange with the middle aisle. It's off to the side. It's a diagonal. So I'm suggested that they turn the screen on a matching diagonal. So the left side and the right side have equal access to the screen. Otherwise, the right people against the right-hand wall will not enjoy it at all. And we're fixing the screen, which will be bigger and lower, and sound will trail behind. It's a work in progress, which is why I have not jumped into it. But the thing is, who will come and on what day and what time would you come to a live screening? Carol will come. All right, Carol, you got to get more people to come with you. I'll come. Susie Giambattista, I'm sure will come. Right, Susie?
Out of town.
And Mitch will.
No, out of town.
Out of town, yeah. And David is out of town. Joel's out of, you know.
I will be out of town also and would participate if we do it the way we've been doing it.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I'm trying to set up that new room so that people can zoom in to the discussion in the room. But we're a long way from that, believe me. And it's, I've given up being upset about that. We just have to let these things take their own time, right, Fern?
A lot of time.
A lot of time. Be grateful that the renovation is as successful as it was. Yeah, and because it is lovely. So I don't know.
Do you have a definite movie for August or no?
No, I haven't chosen it yet. I'm still looking for something more current. There are lots of old movies I could show. One of Warren Beatty's first movies I'm very partial to, called Mickey 1, a black and white film directed by the guy who directed I don't know. You know him. He did Missouri Breaks and other films in the 70s and 80s. And then there's a Federico Fellini film I'd like to try out on you people called 8½. Anybody see it in their youth? Okay, Arlene, I see the gray hair bobbing up and down at the bottom of the frame.
Saw that years ago.
Yeah, right. Well, again, films are timeless because they touch us in some way. Still, even at our age, you know, the fundamental things apply. And a director's fantasy is still a director's fantasy, you know, 60 years later after he makes it. It's a film about the imagination in art and the director's inability to imagine his next film. And it's probably Fellini's best film because it's magical and it's poetic. And Marina's nodding her head. So the question is, do people have an interest in a film like this? It stars Mastroianni, his go-to star. And I don't know the women's names. But I'd love to program that. It's best seen on a big screen because it's so gorgeous. It's like Samurai, Seven Samurai. The black and white cinematography can just be outstanding and transport you. You just fall into it because it's not, it invites you to fall into its scene instead of giving you colors that, attract you. You're filling in the void that the color has left. And you focus on the characters and what's happening. Those two films, Mickey 1 and 8.5, are keen on my list because they're about similar things about the creative process. And it's great to see Warren Beatty in his 20s. Mitchell, you had.
How do you feel about Wag the Dog for being very contemporary?
It's contemporary. I watched it years ago and I didn't like it as a movie, so I have to revisit it. So I'll take a look at it again if I get to it. It's about a political operative and Dustin Hoffman's in it. I forget who else. Not a bad film. Is that a
Levinson.
Barry, what's his name film?
Levinson?
Pardon?
Levinson?
Yes.
Levinson.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah.
So Betty?
Yeah, you had mentioned 8.5, and I did see it decades ago and don't remember it at all and think I was probably too young to really understand and appreciate it. So I would love to see it again. I know it's a classic.
Yeah. Well,
And
I
to hear it
hate to lean on
discussed.
classics. We seem to get a better response when we pick new movies. But occasionally, one of our most attended films was not A Voice in the Crowd. It was the Andy of Mayberry, his early film. It was A Face in the Crowd, I think, where this innocuous country western singer becomes a politician and rises to power until there's an open mic moment and he gets debunked. But that was astonishing. And then Gentleman's Agreement, 1937, with Cary Grant about passive anti-Semitism. Yeah, I don't want to show that again because most of you have seen it, unless you want to see it. But it's this wonderful film where he goes underground as a Jew to report on anti-Semitism. And he finds this nice waspy girlfriend. And when she finds he's a Jew, or at least he says he is, she pushes him away. And there's a great speech at the end where he says, the problem is not the hate, it's the blind acceptance of the hate, the passive bystander, like the German citizens who let it happen. Really terrific film, well acted, well written, and I don't want to show that again, but I'm on the hunt for stuff like that all the time. So if you see of anything, please email me. Mitch, thank you for your suggestion. I'll give it some thought and maybe some time. I can look at it again. So I'll be in touch. This was a great discussion. I'm glad you all liked it so much. It's great when you see a film that really moves you, isn't it? Like it's not profound, but it provokes discussion.
Well, thank you again for
Thank you
finding
so
this. I mean,
much.
we all liked it, and I think it was like a really hidden. I think it was Carol. Somebody said it was a jewel, and it was really a hidden jewel, and probably. We probably never would have seen it if you hadn't found it for us. So thank you.
I just discovered it a year ago. Okay. I love that you loved it. That's why I do it. And I'll see you in a month. Take care.
Thank you. Take
Thank you.
care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey. No.